Welcome to Constructed Futures. I'm Hugh Seaton. Today I'm here with Jim Smith, EVP of Cloud Solutions at LoadSpring. Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Hugh. Thanks for having me.
So Jim, let's start with what LoadSpring does.
So we built a system called the LoadSpring Cloud Platform that provides a fully managed service for project teams across, E&Rs, top firms, as well as the owners and operators they support. In all cases, we're helping these businesses increase their profits, win new projects, eliminate risk, and then we use our analytics to help them improve their business intelligence.
That's an awfully big kind of array of things that you provide for people. Where do you usually start?
So usually they identify an application that a diverse project team needs access to, something that they don't want to have to install and learn how to use, or something they want to share with third-party contractors. A lot of these projects have third-party vendors involved for different disciplines, and we've all got to be on the same page sharing the same information. No one wants to let all those third parties onto their networks.
Okay, let's start with what fully managed means. I think people see that a lot, and it's one of those words people kind of gloss over, but I'd love to dig into what fully managed means.
Sure. So from our perspective, we manage, control, monitor everything up to and including the applications that project teams need to work with. So project teams simply come together, identify the best of breed applications that they want to use for scheduling, for geospatial, for BIM, really anything surrounding these mostly architecture, engineering, and construction projects. And they simply log in and run the app. They focus on the functionality and the value they get out of the software. We focus on the security, the backup, the monitoring, keeping the lights on.
And how do you guys deal with the fact that some of these, if not all, a lot of these anyway, a lot of these software platforms kind of like to keep their data to themselves, some of them more than others, but how do you get around that?
Yeah, it's tricky. A lot of customers are out there looking at new software and trying to decide which type of model they go with. And in every instance where you look at a system where you can install any application wherever you want, those applications can sit side by side in a secure, fast environment so they can share information. So the ability to integrate between, say, an ERP system and a cost control system for project is really seamless.
But and so you guys are able to kind of work around the fact that's we're trying to avoid naming names here, and I'm going to continue to do that. But you guys are able to get around the fact that, again, a lot of these systems aren't really built to be sharing data, even though they're getting better. They still often aren't so wonderful at sharing information. Is that kind of what you guys are specializing in, or one of the parts that you're specializing in is still being able to integrate them and kind of share the data?
We do. We actually cloud enable a lot of applications that were never designed for the cloud. So years ago, they're built to be set up, on premise on a particular set of workstations. Now we're trying to provide access to people all across the globe for those same applications. So by breathing that new life into them, it gives the customers who have already invested in those licenses and in the training of how to use the product more years before, say, a web native application's out there. There's something that's designed natively for the cloud that you think might run faster.
That's really interesting. So you guys are hooking up on-premises instances of certain software and it kind of integrating it into the managed cloud environment. Am I using the right words there?
So we do both. So customers will come to us with, brand new, modern cloud-based applications that were built to run in their browser, and they want us to take on the hosting. So it's one less thing for them to worry about.
Right.
Once they see how easy it is and how fast it goes and how secure the environment is and the support responsiveness that they get from our team, they want to bring on more applications. So within the first 60 days, 2/3 of our customers add more software to their cloud. So the second environment would be something maybe traditionally an on-premise type application. It could be a Windows client server application where you've got database servers to worry about. You've got application and middleware servers to worry about. You've got front-end web servers and web services machines to have to deal with. So they bring that up to LoadSpring, and it's a very easy onboarding process where we effectively perform this lift and shift and move that environment to LoadSpring. So now you've got the two flavors there. But then they come along and there's always that third request. Say, well, I've built my own application. I've got this custom developed piece of software that unfortunately they have no documentation for.
Right.
Unfortunately, they don't really have anybody that may know how to fix it if something breaks, but they rely on it and it works and it's built into their process. So that third application really becomes the custom developed tools that LoadSpring can set up on our cloud. And now you've got all of your project applications in one place, in one portal. Everything talks to each other. It's fast and it's secure.
So the last part is really interesting because we're seeing more and more contractors create their own solutions of varying kinds. I mean, it's been going on for a while and sometimes very successfully, sometimes a little less so. But is some of what you're saying that like if a company is looking to, a contractor specifically is looking to create their own, call it a scheduling app, that you guys are able to provide, whether it's an SDK or just some kind of baseline connectivity that allows them to go ahead and do that, but they can also, without having to do it themselves, integrate what they've just built into a bigger managed system that you guys are helping them with?
We can. A lot of it depends on what the endpoints are. What's the other application that they want to talk to? So from our perspective, if they want to talk to a product that already has a web service or already has an API, it's really easy just to provide the URL and some credentials and they can connect to it. Then it really comes down to the customer and their developers or their contractors to look at what calls they want to make, what fields do they want to pull from those instances. So getting them integrated works really well. For these customers, we also provide them with development environments. So not only do they have a LoadSpring production level cloud that's managed by service level agreements that guarantee their uptime, guarantee their performance, we also give them non-production environments, something they can test in, something they could even have, say, remote administration access to if they wanted to go out there and build their own code. Now, for us, we're monitoring the system. So if a customer needs to be able to, restart a development server during the middle of the day, well, we're monitoring it as if it's up and it's live and it's real time. So we got to make sure that we're following our practices on who's doing what when, that there's a special request for change or RFC process followed. The other part that we get to, and you'll hear more in one of these future episodes as you talk with Asif and Eric from LoadSpring, is about Project Intel. And Project Intel is a new offering where we're helping customers get to trusted data. There are too many folks out there that want to start building analytics and talk about AI and ML, but they're really not ready for it. Most of the data isn't something that can be trusted. So what we're doing is we built a system that will take that data source, it will convert it to a system that's trusted. We know that the information that's in there, it's good. It goes through an auto remediation process and it gets rid of the duplicate data, the testing, the sample, the demo, the training data. It gets rid of projects that may be missing information, have the wrong codes. So now you've got this clean set of information. We then put that into a data pond, and it gets to a data lake. So those customers that want to integrate with information, well, they can go right to that data lake and get that clean, pristine, trusted information versus looking at the schema of a particular data source and saying, well, I see 5 last modified columns, or I see 5 end dates. Which is the right field? Which is the right one? So Project Intel gets into that data quickly.
You touched on something that we're hearing more and more about, and that is data lakes. And the idea of a data lake is it's a place where you put data that you then later on will do things with. How do you guys help people with that? Because I think there's a little bit of, no pun intended, jumping into the lake. See what I just did there? Without necessarily the strategy all the way thought through. And the problem with the lake is it can be so big that you net out with, it's like buying too many books, and now you got to deal with the fact that you got all these books and you're never going to read them. Not that that's ever happened to me. But you know what I mean? The downside of a ton of data that you haven't processed properly is you now have gigabytes or terabytes of data that you feel like you should do something with, but you're not going to invest in especially as the data ages. So how do you help people think through? Let's start with data lakes.
Yeah, it's what you talk about is it can be overwhelming. It can get very expensive, and we want to make sure people aren't wasting their time with data that's not going to give them a good answer.
Right.
So, from our perspective, we want to make sure that and we've built a deployment plan. So we're going to bring our customers through a 3, 6, 12, 18-month plan that shows them, here's how we're going to bring you up this mountain. Here's how we're going to get you to that clean, trusted data, and you can start generating reports that your consumers go ahead and interact with, and you know that what they're seeing is solid from a decision-making perspective. So we're going to help get the decisions on what are those questions I need to answer. There could be 3 questions I want to know. How much was this project supposed to cost? How much did it actually cost? And how much have I spent on it so far? That could be the highest level for one audience. Someone else may want to look at efficiency. How effective is my team at actually completing these tasks on time? So first we want to go out and define what those items are, the questions that we're going to answer. Then we'll bring it through that process of selecting the data sources. It could be coming from a scheduling system, a cost management system. It could be coming from a geospatial system. So we identify those data sources, pull the information together into the data pond, and then when we present it in the data lake, it's a flattened, normalized architecture that has those sensible names of what you're looking for. So we get them to clean information, we get them to fields and names that make sense for anyone who's trying to understand what's happening with that project information.
I'm going to stop for a second and linger on a point you just covered, and that is naming. How much time do you, rephrase this. How big a deal do you guys think it is that naming strategy happens before other things? I know that sounds like a rhetorical question, but I think it's the sort of thing people don't think about until they have to deal with it later. Right? Is that
It's
like
huge.
really thinking about how are we going to name things and what's our strategy for naming so that we can find things in a year.
It's tremendous. I mean, from a baseline perspective, just get everyone speaking the same language. Here at LoadSpring, we've got a lot of engineers, and we're all very specific, and we try and get very precise at times. And that accuracy, oftentimes these codes, these fields, these names, they're very similar, but you get one component of it wrong, and we're looking in the totally wrong place.
Right.
So the naming convention has to be consistent. It has to be trained. It has to be understood. And what we're doing is we're putting in place that best practice to make sure that you're enforcing it.
How do people tend to enforce that?
So a lot of it comes down to you want to automate as much as possible.
Right.
Right? I know there's a great saying about do not command, which you cannot enforce. But if we know that the project gets initiated in one system, by the time it makes it to the second or third system, it's got to have the same codes. It's got to have the same naming information. So this gets back to that idea of integration. We want to automate it. So if something gets started in one system, say from an estimating perspective, when that gets pushed over to the schedule, it's all consistent. It's all got the same name. Because when I want to come around later and actually run some S curves against it and compare them, it has to match up name by name. Or otherwise, it could be a nightmare. This is where our customers tell us that they need to get to these cost and schedule performance index on a weekly basis. Usually there's 2 people in the organization that can do it. They've got some really fancy, high-powered Excel spreadsheets with macros in them. But guess what? If they're out sick for the week, if they're on vacation, it doesn't get done. So part of this LoadSpring analytics tool we built is it's automated. So it's right there on demand. So users can just click with a button and see all the information that they have access to in those clean, sensible formats. And we know that it's trusted because the data is uniform throughout.
Yeah, this is a big deal. And I think what we're finding across the construction industry is so much of what people will call data is, free form typing or writing, that even if somebody's trying to follow something, the reality is we make mistakes or we mistype and we keep moving on. So I think that the ability to enforce, and sometimes that means constraining it, right? Or automating it, either way. So it's a drop down, so you have to get it right, or it's automatic, and you're not actually entering it. But it's as minor a thing as naming sounds. It really underpins the ability for a lot of what you've described to actually work, right? Especially when you're talking about different products and different data models and so on.
It does, and every customer is different, and some are going to break it down based by, well, do I want to look at the project or the program or the portfolio? So depending on how I lay this out and how my business operates, I may have a different scheme for each of them. And what we're going to do is just try and make it consistent, set that workflow, set the logic. So those rules will tell us, this scheduler in particular is not following the guidelines for our best practice, we're not going to be able to use this data when it comes down to the analysis piece.
That's right. Or you're not gonna be able to find it, right? Because you've named it so many different things.
Right. So what we've done is to correct it. We'll never go back and change the source data, but we can change it going forward as it gets to the data lake. So there are ways that we can automate that process so that we're not going to go back and again change the original data source it came from,
Right.
but we can adjust it going forward so that now it's uniform.
Well, this is what you see in the handover process a lot too, right? Is that there's all this data and all these forms and content that's come from different subcontractors and so on, and somebody has to translate it all so it can be viewed at once. A lot of what you're saying, but you cannot change the original document because there's often legal implications of doing that. So your job is to create little mini translators, right?
Yep.
That's great. You know, it's funny.
So you're right on the I'm sorry. On the translator side of it, we build connectors.
Right.
So there isn't just one black box that's going to do all this, but we've got several connectors that we'll look at each endpoint and these different systems we want to pull together. And one's going to reach out to cost estimating system, another to a cost management system, another to scheduling, another one to risk, another to my construction document control system. So those connectors can reach out and pick those top most popular best of breed products out there. And if it's something that's not on our list, okay, we can import a spreadsheet. You can take a flat file and you can go from that too.
Yeah, love it. So talk to me a little bit about who comes to you. What do you often, when someone picks up the phone and says, I need LoadSpring? Obviously, they're saying something else first, and you convince them that LoadSpring is obviously the answer. But what are they looking for when they come to you?
So it's funny the way that they come around. In many cases, we're looking at AEC customers.
Mm-hmm.
So I look, 50% of our customer base is from AEC industry. Mm-hmm. And when I break out from there, we start looking at utilities, transportation, heavy rail projects. Even when you get into the chemical processing, refinery type and global manufacturers, they're still doing, in most cases, AEC type projects. Mm-hmm. So they may use the next world's greatest earth moving equipment, but they're using a project management process to manage it, the design of the equipment as well as the facilities are being made in. So those customers will come to LoadSpring because a couple of triggers happen. One, they may get with a new software that they don't want to have to learn, they don't want to have to manage, they don't want to have to go out there and get hardware to support it. Another trigger is when they're going on to a new project. So oftentimes we see joint ventures. So for example, someone's going to build a $3.5 billion bridge, and there's 3 or 4 parties that form this venture to put it together and get the bonding capacity, and then they'll go out there and complete it. And those customers really come down to saying, well, we're partnered on this new bridge project, but they're each competing with each other on other projects. Right. So it's kind of like vendor one or joint venture partner one is not going to let joint venture partner two on their network. Joint venture partner two is not going to let joint venture one partner on their network. So they need that unbiased third-party secure network to share all this information. So we'll see that a lot. Other triggers are just software upgrades. When a customer is used to running a particular application, and now there's a new major versions come out, and the architecture's changed. They've gone from one database platform to a different one, or they moved from one type of web server to another one, and they don't have the expertise for it. Upgrades for software is always a good time to move it to the cloud, really to get it off their network. And we try and help those customers along that journey where they need to determine what's that cloud awareness. Is it something that's new to them and they're just kind of dipping their toe in to try cloud applications? Some customers come along and say, I'm SaaS first. If I can get the application from the vendor who designed it and developed it, I'm going to go with that as my first route. But then if I can't integrate with it, now I want to bring a partner along that can do it for me. So there's a few triggers that will bring it along, but usually it's AEC, it's large utility projects. Anybody that wants to get into the point of reducing their risk. Big projects start out, many cases there's heavy liquidated damages for every day that they're late. And they look at all the reasons why projects have been late in the past. Things like support. If they have a problem with a piece of software, where do they go to get an answer? Many cases, they're stuck in this finger pointing contest between a local help desk, a software vendor, maybe a third-party provider, and the user just kind of spinning their wheels, getting nothing done. So we've built our support team so that our customers get a 15-minute response to those support requests, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Well, on average, that works out if you took maybe 10 cases a month compared to an internal environment, save about $25,000 in savings just off the bat from a support responsiveness perspective. And when you start comparing that to, well, if my project's late, I've got heavy damages to pay, it adds up quick.
That makes a ton of sense. And as I look at what you guys have in the platform, it seems like you're also, whether somebody is triggered to go, look for something like you, or it's after they've worked with you for a while. It seems like some of the things like the analytics that you provide has got to be growing their internal capability too, right? Like you're showing them the performance of a network in a way that it's tough for internal teams. They may get there later, but they don't start with the ability to really think like that. Does that kind of resonate with what you see?
It does. Some of them, they'll never kind of understand the experience until they've been through it, until
Yeah.
they see it. They see the value that's there. And it's hard to message, honestly, just from a marketing perspective. So a lot of what we see are customers that used our system at one company they worked for. They had a great experience. They go to a new employer, start a new project and say, this isn't going to work. I need to get back on LoadSpring. We had a customer, a large energy firm in Mid-Atlantic, start last year that has an $8 billion renewables project. And the moment they landed at this new company, they knew that they were never going to be able to do what they could do before.
Right.
So it's funny, they contacted our support rep. They didn't call me. They didn't call their sales rep. They called their support rep to introduce them to this new opportunity because they had such a wonderful experience with us prior.
That's great. And I want to stick a little bit to this analytics thing. And I say that because analytics, especially really knowing the state of your system and how it's performing and so on, and just even more than that, the kind of thing, like to your point earlier, it's hard to talk about until you've played with it. But once you have that level of awareness and understanding, you really miss it. So it's exactly the kind of thing that maybe doesn't bring people in the door, but it brings them back because it's just all about really upgrading your experience and understanding of your data and your system.
Yeah, the business intelligence of the cloud we've developed, allows those customers to see, like, where am I really spending my money? So if I went out there and I bought 500 licenses of a particular product, I know I've got a new team that's starting in 2 weeks, and I think I may have to buy another 100 licenses to support them. Well, you don't really know. In the
Yeah.
past, when you're on LoadSpring, you look at that usage report and it tells you you've only used 400 so far, so you've got another 100 available still. So a lot of customers can pay for their first full year of service just simply with these reports that help them be more efficient in license usage.
It's funny you bring that up. There's actually a startup. I'm not sure if they're still around anymore. That I was having some conversations with a couple of years ago, and their entire business model was going into enterprise. It wasn't specific to construction, and auditing how many SaaS subscriptions different people had signed up for that were below thresholds. So how many box, you know what I mean? And they'd find
Yeah.
hundreds. And it was their whole point was to harmonize that and wind up getting enterprise agreements or different tiers that would save the company money. And it was an incredible proposition because to the point you're making, you don't know what people. I mean, the big stuff like a Procore or whatever. Yeah, of course you know who's doing what. Or how much you're paying for, but you may not know how much it's being used, and you may not know whether the power users are doing stuff or so on and so forth. So really understanding who's using what, I think is just it is one of those little game changers, right? Where it just you just have such a better understanding of your business.
Oh, it does. The the users from our market, there's a lot of project related buys.
Mhm.
So they might buy, an analysis software for a particular project, but the rest of the company doesn't know that it's even there.
Yeah.
So we're making it visible so that everybody knows what assets I own, where they're being used, and how can I potentially go and reapply them. So the intelligence is there for it. Just on the licensing side of it, there's a utility in the Northeast that we saved them $400,000 simply in database license costs by going with LoadSpring. So as part of our service that we provide, we include all that middleware. So the back-end infrastructure, the back-end licensing for Oracle SQL databases, for example, middleware components, there's application server components. Now, customers really bring their application software license to the table,
Mhm.
and we provide everything else. So there's massive cost savings there.
And how do you guys think about the that end to end project control? That so we've talked a little bit about knowing who's on it and what they're doing, but kind of sitting up above that is the idea that this is for a project or set of projects, and because it's all in one place, your ability to control the project and really have visibility is qualitatively different from what it would be if you were switching screens between different things, right?
Yeah. The LCP is that single pane of glass. So our global cloud offering lets these international organizations look across the entire planet on here's my business units, here are the applications they're using, here's their projects. The analytics shows me the health of these projects, based on a map. So I can see on the globe where my projects are happening. I can have different KPIs available that show me color wise how well they're doing or they're not doing. And then I've got that single pane of glass where I can see all support cases, all users, all access points for everybody. Now, a big component here on the security side of things is got to make it easy. So we've implemented an identity management system so that there's no more passwords to reset. There's no more passwords to forget. As long as you've got your credentials to your corporate network,
Mhm.
you can automatically log into LoadSpring. So to provide that kind of global access or global visibility and let the customer's IT group control it. If someone's shut off in their Active Directory and their Azure AD, they're automatically locked out of LoadSpring. So it gives them that kind of control and command of the cloud across the globe.
And that's interesting, this across the globe idea, where you often think this is a little bit of a post-pandemic way of thinking of things, but we're so much more virtual now that there has been a little bit of a shift to how we look at who we're paying attention to, right? Where it's so much more dispersed than it was, that part of everybody's job now is keeping an eye, or at least having a sense of what activity is going on and where it's going on. So this idea that you're kind of looking at things through, I love that, single pane of glass, and really understanding what people are doing across the world is pretty powerful.
Yeah, it plays a huge part in data sovereignty.
Yeah.
We have some customers, public agencies in different countries around the world that mandate this data cannot leave this country. Well, that's not a problem. And we provide them with in-country disaster recovery options. They get that kind of data sovereignty. They get that in-region performance. At the same time, we've got customers that they buy licenses that may only be used in particular countries. So someone who's bought some CAD licenses in North America, they can't have someone over in the UK logging in and running it. So the way our platform is set up, you can put fences around the environment. So only users within a given region can actually access the data and can access those applications. So it helps you stay in compliance with licensing for all your different software applications.
And I'd love to end with a little discussion of security. So kind of you brought it up along the way, and it's implied that you're keeping things secure. But how do you guys approach security?
So doing this in the cloud for as long as we have,
Yeah.
security is number one. That's our number one priority. That's where we're focusing our time. If customers don't trust that we can keep their data secure, they're not going to be our customer anymore. So we look at this on an ongoing basis. We have a security team dedicated to it. Now, on average, it costs $3.8 million per breach
Right.
for these different things that happen. And we see the major ones that make the news in the last couple of years. A lot of the items in the last couple of years, it's all about phantom ransomware. Well, phantom ransomware is something that is easily prevented. Now, in our case, we don't allow anybody in the public to connect to a website that LoadSpring may manage without first logging into the LCP. So that unauthenticated access is a core way, it's a core vector, I should call it, that someone can go connect to a website and take it over. So because we force you to authenticate, first you can't even get there, you couldn't send it a message. That gives us one layer of protection. Another item we heard a lot in the last couple of months about Log4j, another vulnerability that dealt with really any Java server out there from a logging perspective has a log4j tools on it. Well, in our environment, even if we had an application that was vulnerable to it, our security is locked down such that users can't connect outbound from the LoadSpring system. So once you're logged in, it's prevented from going out and getting a bad payload and bringing it back in. So we've spent a lot of time patching, reviewing these on a daily basis to make sure that the environments are locked down. But there's a few things like requiring authentication, like not allowing outbound access, that are just, they're simple in a way to eliminating these problems altogether.
It's interesting. I remember a couple of years ago, the FBI would be going around, and this is primarily in the Northeast where I was at the time, going to mid-sized companies to say, you're probably the vector of attack for a larger company like an insurance company because they're so locked down. And what I'm hearing you say is you're able to provide that level of lockdown for companies that aren't necessarily Aetna or, General Motors, so that it isn't so much that you're fixing the problem afterwards. You just aren't letting people in, which is really
Right.
cool.
So I mean, those boutique project management firms with only a few employees, they're getting the same level of security as a Fortune 50 global manufacturer we support. So they get that same level of security. As you mentioned, you think back to folks like, I think it was the Home Depot credit card hack a few years ago. Well, it came through an HVAC contractor
Yeah.
in Ohio.
Yeah.
It wasn't through someone that connected to the Home Depot network. They got it through one of their partners. So that's a major area of concern.
So, Jim,
Sorry.
no worries. So, Jim, this has been a fantastic conversation. Where should people go to learn more about what you guys are up to and kind of understand their own needs?
So loadspring.com is your best resource for customer testimonials, for videos about the platform so you can demo to see how it all works. There's lots of case studies there that will allow you to align an existing customer to your industry, your project, even your role in the organization. That will tell you kind of how we support them and how we can do the same for any team.
Love it. Well, Jim, thank you for being on the podcast. This has been great.
Thanks, you. I appreciate it.